Even as I thrived in the commercial courts, there was one passion that I always carried within me, and that is this notion of freedom of choice, freedom to practice one's faith. By 1997, 1998, it had become increasingly evident to me that we were on a slippery slope. If you were to go back and Google Section 12, Sharia law, in bracket, Criminal Offences, Wilayah Persekutuan Act of 1997, what it says in summary is this: it is an offense to hold an opinion contrary to fatwa. Now, when you think that through, it simply means you cannot think. And in that regard, then, Malay Muslims in Malaysia, once they may be told that they are the chosen ones, in effect are third-class citizens. Now, in 1999, and I take that as my starting point in the activism that I began to embark on, perhaps at that point in time unconscious, not quite conscious that I was getting into a hole that would increasingly become so big and so deep that I would not be able to extricate myself. In 1999, in Kelantan, a state in the East Coast, 4 Malays who had renounced Islam had been hauled up into the Sharia courts and were being tried for non-compliance with an order made by a Sharia court in 1996, before they had renounced. Midway through those proceedings, they pulled out statutory declarations that they had signed in 1998 to say that of their own free will, they renounced Islam. You can imagine the furor that broke out in the court that day. Prosecutors asked for an adjournment of a week to decide what to do with the Pope. Adjournment was granted. The following week, another adjournment was sought, and again it was granted. I drove up on the 19th of November to see for myself what would happen. The Sharia court proceeded to convict them of non-compliance with an order, and notwithstanding that they had statutory declarations to evidence their renunciation of Islam, they were sentenced to 3 years jail each. Still, the naive young lawyer, I thought Article 11, Federal Constitution says every person has the right to freely profess and practice his faith, and subject to Clause 4 to propagate it. The law seemed pretty clear. I could have taken it to the civil courts, which is what I did. And I thought, fairly straightforward. The High Court judge thought otherwise. And I saw the most creative legal gymnastics in court that day to avoid the plain language of the Constitution. The applications were dismissed. We sought orders of certiorari to quash the orders of the Sharia court. We sought declaratory orders seeking a determination that, given that they had exercised their rights under Article 11, the Sharia authorities had no jurisdiction over that. Everything got thrown out. We took it to the Court of Appeal. 2003, appeal dismissed. 2004 in the federal court, penultimate. You're not getting anywhere after that. Dismissed. And in essence, there was a flippant disregard of the judicial oath of office to uphold, preserve, and defend the Constitution. Now, you will all recall, I imagine you will, because it became so infamous, the case of Lina, the Muslim woman who converted to Catholicism for purpose. They actually fell in love. And that case again went up to the federal court, and again, the federal court displayed its unwillingness to defend the Constitution. Now, by that point in time, I came to the conclusion that the courts would no longer serve the people. And I therefore turned to attempts at social reform. we started an initiative called Article and took forums through the nation. The second went extremely well, very well received. When we were in the States, in the North, the mullahs were in front of the hotel to protest, and they literally shut it down. 2 months later, in Johor, a state in the south, the police escorted the mullahs right up to the forum podium, and that shut us down. The following day, then Prime Minister Badawi said, no more forums, we were banned. Prior to that, given my concern illusory, I, together with many in civil society, had begun and established an interfaith commission. The preparatory work took something like 4 years, culminating in a national conference in February of 2005. It was overwhelmingly well received by most in civil society. The following morning, UMNO Youth sent a memorandum to then Prime Minister Ahmad Badawi saying, if you condone this, you are in trouble. Prime Minister Badawi acknowledged that there was value in this effort, but said the nation was not ready for interfaith harmony. That was the net effect of him shooting down that effort. As I said, by 2007, I had become disillusioned. I had become disillusioned with the courts. I had become disillusioned with civil society, particularly the middle class. Yes, Malaysia is a wealthy country, but there is great disparity in its distribution. Middle class looks out for its own. By 2007, the government had effectively shut my voice. I created, therefore, a blog called The People's Parliament. And, well, it became quite popular. And it did enable me to get my message to the ground, which was largely an effort to galvanize, to wake up like-minded people who felt for long that they were isolated, they were alone, they were alienated, that no one else felt as they did. That kicked off. By 2009, many of us acknowledged that 40 years of race-based politics had begun to see a nation divided. For long, the UMNO-led Barisan Nasional, when it saw the need to, would pit the Malay against the Chinese. The Chinese, they would contend, hold the economic power, and for that reason, it was imperative that the Malays always held the political sway. And therefore, their fate had to rest in them. Yet, at the same time, an economic policy that was established in 1974, called the New Economic Policy, which had as its fundamental base the eradication of poverty, one, and the elimination of identification of ethnicity with jobs, i.e. the Malays essentially in the rural farming, the Chinese in the industry, the Indians in the rather small holding. The policy was intended to eliminate that. Whilst noble in its aspirations, in its implementation, we have witnessed wholesale corruption. That which was intended to reach the needy has in fact gone to build huge mansions. And you can see this in the most elite areas in the capital and in most states in Sabah and Sarawak. It was an economic reform program that went bad from day one. Now, with all this in mind, in 2009, many of us came together and we launched Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia. Translated, it means I am a child of this nation. Its objective was to incrementally begin to dismantle the polarized society that we are slowly becoming. as I said, the Malays pitted against the Chinese whenever the government saw the need. That effort is a long haul. It's not something, you cannot undo 40 years of racism in one generation. It also requires a complete overhaul of an education system that, for example, in the history syllabus, distorts the actual history of the formation of this nation. The contribution of the various ethnic groups is downplayed to, if you will, profile, and I have to say, with much distortion, the role of the Malays. The overcoming of this 40 years will take a very, very long time. It was for this reason that even as I and many others launched Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia, as the 13th GE loomed, 13th General Election loomed, it became obvious to many of us that we had to remove the current regime. And it required a short burst of energy in the right direction. Myself, together with my friend, Raja Petra Kamarudin, together we launched in late 2010 the Malaysian Civil Liberties Movement. Its objective was to galvanize and to bring together the right-minded Malaysians who wanted to see change, and to perhaps galvanize them as a third force, to work with all opposition parties who were prepared to give us the reform agenda that we had crafted. By 2011, things became difficult for me within the MCLM, Malaysian Civil Liberties Movement, and it coincided with efforts by several non-government individuals, non-government organizations to form a movement. In English, it's anything but UMNO. Interestingly enough, translated into Malay, it's asalkan bukan UMNO. Abu works both ways. It was very easy to take the message to the heartland. We pushed for almost 2 years. And it became increasingly evident that we had two battles on our hands. One, to take the truth to the Malay heartlands. We have this problem in Malaysia where the mainstream media is wholly controlled by UMNO and the other Barisan Nasional component parties. Now that means, whilst urbanites have the alternative media, or at least since the late 90s, those who live in the heartlands only get the news that the government intends them to receive. And this was the biggest challenge we faced. To get the truth to the Malays in the heartland. One, that since independence, UMNO has never really intended to represent their best interests. UMNO, in fact, never fought for the independence of then Malaya and later Malaysia. Number two, this whole notion of Malay supremacy has no basis in Islam. This, we felt, was crucial that the Malays in the heartland understood, that it could not be countenanced in Islam. And finally, that in the name of uplifting the lives of the Malays, it was in fact UMNO themselves who were robbing the Malays blind. It became crucial to us to take this message to the Malay heartland. Secondly, Canberra Times, I think, reported 2 days ago, and if you allow me to read this, I'll very quickly quote. This was in relation to your Prime Minister Abbott's apology to the government of Malaysia. And this is what the Canberra Times wrote. Najib, that's our, well, I've just said I do not recognize Najib as my Prime Minister. But this is what they said. Najib leads a government that gained power through a gerrymander. The Malaysian government is one which is on par with Sri Lanka, corrupt and short on any notion of human rights. Najib is well aware of what the ruling UMNO party has done to hold on to power. It is ruthless, stubborn, and acts outside its own laws. Now, they got it absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. This was the second battle we had to take on, head on. The cheating that we had to expect. Since 2007, I was involved with this initiative called Bersih, which has been fighting for electoral reforms in order to level the electoral playing field and in order to ensure that my vote was equal to the next. 8 reforms were sought. Now, I won't take you through each and every one. We asked for the indelible ink. This is to ensure that there was no double voting. We asked for an overhaul and a cleanup of the electoral roll. For this reason, it is replete with phantom voters. You will have instances where a one-bedroom house, if you scrutinize the electoral roll, they will have us believe has 60 inhabitants. All right? And if you did a physical check, do not be surprised if you find the house unoccupied. Now that was the situation. That was the situation we were confronted with. We launched several efforts, one of which was to issue warnings to foreigners who had been given identity cards and who had been placed on the ballot, on the electoral roll, that if they showed up on polling day, we would beat their brains in. Now, many found this distasteful. Many were shocked. Particularly, they felt that one who had practiced in the courts for 20 years surely could not take this route and see this as a solution. Now, I could not at that point in time entertain this criticism, but I will say this now. The objective was this: if we could put the fear of death in even half of them, and even if that half did not show up, then it would be to that extent that we would have curtailed the cheating. And I will say this, that it had its effect. It had its effect. But as I was telling my friend Greg at the back, our efforts came too little, too late. 1. UMNO Barisan Nasional won the poll, taking 48% of the popular vote, as compared to the opposition's 52%. But more telling, out of 222 parliamentary seats, they took 112. In fact, they took 138. But the 112 that they took, that was sufficient to form simple majority government, was won with nearly 20% of the popular vote. All right? So, Canberra Times got it absolutely spot on. They won on a gerrymander. Now, that's only half the story. We were also let down by an opposition that simply refused to unite. We had implored the leaders in Sabah and Sarawak that the people were ready for change, but what the people wanted to see was a united opposition that would take One Barisan Nasional on straight contests. Because history has shown us that every time there was a multi-cornered contest, the end wronged home. It didn't happen. The opposition was not able to galvanize all the opposing forces, not just within the opposition parties, but within the NGOs, amongst the NGIs, the non-government individuals. They were unable to unite the forces. You can see, and I will be the first to very quickly concede, My activism in the courts, as far as I'm concerned, abject failure. We were not able to see that justice was served. Attempts at social reform have run into a governmental brick wall. Electoral reforms that have been promised, the indelible ink on polling day, mine washed out within 10 minutes. This was rampant. The electoral roll never got cleaned. Never got cleaned. As I said, we carried out covert operations, and we were able to identify oil palm plantation workers from Sabah, flown in, picked up by government agency vans, taken to destinations undisclosed. When they were queried, they very candidly admitted that they were plantation workers being flown in without being told where they were being taken to or why they were being flown into West Malaysia. We cannot get the electoral reforms. UMNO Barisan Nasional, if I was advising UMNO Barisan Nasional, I would have to tell them, if any one of the reforms that are being sought and you have signed your own death warrant, that is the end of your power. We cannot get the reforms we so desperately need, electoral reforms. They will not give us the social reforms that we are demanding. Now, my principal concern, and what continues to drive me in the activism that I do, is that the last 40, 50 years of UMNO BN rule has seen the wealth of the nation hijacked, leaving almost 40% of our population living in poverty. Now, government statistics will tell you otherwise. They will tell you that in 1974, 50% of the country lived in poverty. That today, it is down to 6%. They use a poverty line indicator, and if you will just bear with me, I need to give you these details. They use a poverty line indicator for West Malaysia, 763 ringgit for a family of 5 living in Kuala Lumpur and you're not poor. Now, 763 ringgit in Kuala Lumpur for a family of 5 will not get you very far. Parti Socialist Malaysia, Parti Rakyat Malaysia, these are socialist parties, non-government organizations that have been working with the poor, have been pushing for a minimum wage. And all we ask for is 1,500 ringgit a month. The UMNO Barisan Nasional government says, we cannot give you what you ask, can only give you 900. Pakatan Rakyat, waiting in the wings, says we can only give you 1,001. And they both sing the same mantra as to why they cannot give you 1,005. They say we will kill the small and medium industries. Now, the question then has to be asked, even the alternative that we look to, who do they represent? The 40% who so desperately need to be uplifted, or the business industry. And what needs to be understood is this: the small and medium industries are largely workforced by foreigners. And you have to understand this: a Bangladeshi who comes to Malaysia is prepared to take 700 a month because he shares a room with 20 others. The average Malaysian with 3 kids and a wife can't have that same arrangement, and therefore he simply cannot take that sort of working arrangement. Now, one very strong indicator that things are deteriorating at home is the worsening crime rate. It's no longer safe to go down to the supermarket. an English woman went down to Bangsar Shopping Center, which is really very, very urban, did her shopping at 6 in the evening, got into a taxi, and as it began to move, the door on the left opened, and another man got in and tried to sort of push her into the other door. She fought back, she screamed, she kicked, she created such a fuss, they opened the door and they threw her out. This is not a rare occurrence. It's happening every day. The increased crime rate is an indicator that we are going downhill. Another concern that we have is the state of our foreign debt. Now, post 13GE, what we've been seeing since 6th May is a heightened state-sponsored polarization. On the early hours of 6th May, just after the elections, when the results had been announced, Najib said this, that perhaps it is time for reconciliation. And in the same breath, suggested that the reduced popularity was due to a Chinese tsunami. Now, I go back again to this. UMNO Barisan Nasional has always played the race card whenever they felt themselves pushed to the wall. And it's happening again. The latest scandal, the pronouncement of the Court of Appeal on the matter of can the Christians, can the Catholics use the word Allah in their prayer? Can they have it in the herald? Now, oddly, the decision was delivered on the eve of the Hajj celebrations, number one. There is concern that we are seeing a heightening of this sort of politics because of a concern on the part of the government that they may not be able to extricate themselves from the financial circumstance the nation finds itself in presently. And the concern some of us have, and we are monitoring this situation, is whether, if the need arises, they will lay blame on the Chinese. Now, again, you must see this in the context of a controlled media. This sort of rhetoric, whilst it may be delivered in close quarters, is then carried by the mainstream media, the print, TV, into the Malay heartlands. This is a concern that some of us have, and it's a serious concern, and we are watching. We are watching to see how the need arises. We might have to deal with it. Where do we go from here? This is what Abu is looking at. Where do we go from here? I underscore this again. We serve the 40% who are deprived of real information. Yes, among that 40%, quite a number would have voted for UMNO Barisan Nasional. But you must understand that they are fed huge doses of misinformation on a daily basis. They are deprived of basic opportunities, education, economic, many because of ethnic considerations. The worst off are the Indian poor. The Chinese perhaps because of the culture of helping your own, have always done that. But the Indians, and you have your Aborigines, we have our Orang Asli in West Malaysia, and the natives in Sabah and Sarawak. Now, last year there was a report in August, I cannot remember which financial institution, in August, that announced Singapore to be the richest nation per capita in the world in August. World Bank report, November 2010. Sabah is the poorest state in Malaysia. Now, when you understand that Singapore until 1965 was part of Malaysia. Malaysia was formed in 1963, 2 years later Singapore left. Singapore does not have the natural resources that Sabah has. Yet if one looks at Singapore's position today, and the position that Sabah has today, and was confirmed by the World Bank report in November 2010, one has to ask why this is happening. It will not change. It will not change simply because again and again and again we have knocked on the doors of UMNO Barisan Nasional to say this cannot go on. The abject poverty of so many in a nation that is so rich simply cannot go on. My experience, and I think many of those back home, is UMNO BN will not reform. And therefore, if the plight of the 40% is to change, we need to reform the governance in the nation. Now, if BN will not give us the reforms, and I will say this again, they will not. They will not give us the reforms. Can we wait to GE14? I can. But I do not know if the 40% can. We have just had the budget announced. The goods and services tax will be kicked in April 2015. We have already faced a fuel price hike a month back, 2 months back, and another one is expected year end. The cost of living on the ground for the poor is simply becoming impossible to manage. And I've said this again and again in many of the rallies that I speak at, that if you allow this to continue, the history of revolutions has taught us that when the numbers of the disenfranchised is large enough, they will come back and change your way of life. That history stares us in the face. We hope in Abu that something like that can be averted. That is the last thing we want to see. But that simply means what waits for us in this short term between now and whenever GE14 is a Herculean media battle to take the truth to the heartlands. To take the truth to the heartlands. To wake them up to the understanding. Now, the other thing you have to understand is the psyche of the Malay in the kampongs, in the villages, in the heartlands, the natives. When you're poor, a 50 ringgit handout amounts to food on the table for 10 days. A family of 6 in the longhouse in Sarawak today lives on 150 ringgit a month. 4 years ago, it was 250 ringgit. But that was because the family could go into the backyard, which was the jungle, and forage. The jungles are gone. It's all in tight muffles, Swiss accounts. So you have no more forest. 80% of the forests are gone. 150 ringgit to sustain a family of 6. When UMNO BN comes and offers you 50 ringgit for your vote, you take that money. You take that money. And that's what's going on. We have this Herculean battle to take the truth to these people in the heartlands. We have the Herculean task of breaking UMNO's elitist hold on the psyche of the Malay. The ability, as they're doing now, the Allah issue, The Allah issue is being played out today in the Malay heartlands as if there is going to be no tomorrow. The impression that is being given is that the Christians are about to hijack the God of the Muslims. Now it sounds hilarious here. I had a debate with Khairi Jamaluddin, the UMNO youth leader, some years back, 2011. And he said this, he said, Haris, I went to my constituency in Rembau and I shared this with the farmers there. And they were alarmed and angry. So I said, that's funny because I was in the farms in Pahang and I shared it with the farmers there. And they said, what I shared with them was this, that the Catholics in Sabah and Sarawak, the baptism, if they do not recite Allah, which means the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, if they do not utter Allah, the baptism is void. The Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, they say Allah. And if they do not say that, the prayer is void. For the Muslims, the recitation of the Al-Fatiha, the first chapter, is an imperative. Now, I shared it with the farmers, and they said, in Malay, they said, oh, Molek. That means, wow, beautiful. So it's how you present the issue to the listener. You present it in an alarmist fashion, and in all likelihood, that's the reaction you will get. This Allah issue is being played up to its hilt right now. When the High Court delivered its decision, the decision that was just appealed recently, what we saw were church burnings. Our intelligence reports that came back was it was UMNO contrived. Then what followed was big heads, the heads of pigs being tossed into the compounds of mosques. Our intelligence reports was this was UMNO contrived. But the urban Malays were not falling for it. You can see therefore that their outreach today, this is the last battle for them. Their last bastion is the heartlands. This is where we need to take our fight. It is a media battle. It is a media battle to take the troops, and it is a media battle to break UMNO's hold on the mind of the Malay. I think my time is about up.